Hello, this is Giselle Gamby, business and life coach and proud host of the Intuitive Pull podcast. We're now pivoting to season 4 with an invitation to raise the stakes. I know I was made to remind people to raise the stakes, to seize, to claim, and execute the vision that you've intuitively seen, and to never accept the crumbs. What would it mean if you raised the stakes in your own life? What would you say yes to? And what would you say an undeniable no to? Be inspired, be agitated, be activated, and most of all, hold this truth, that when you raise the stakes, the quantum field will show you dreams you didn't even know you had. Welcome back, Intuitive Pull community. It's my great joy to have Rosalind or Ros Cardinal on the podcast today. So Ros and I met through LinkedIn, and I have to say, you don't know about this. You don't know about what I'm about to say, Ros, that there was something about your face on the photo. Yeah, there was something about your face that was like, I don't know you really, but there's something about your face that makes me want to know you. So there you go.
That's lovely. Thank you. I've never had anyone say that before.
Well, yeah, it's true because, I do get, several requests and I don't accept every request. And with you, there was just something about your face. So I'm following that and I'm looking forward to having a really awesome conversation with you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Let's just start with, the basics so that people can get a feel of, who you are, the space that you hold, what you do. Can we start there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've got, well, it's kind of a very long business journey, but essentially I kind of have two hats when I work. I've got my organisational development consultancy work, and I work with, government, business, big and small businesses on things like strategy, culture, executive coaching, leadership development, team building, whole range of things. Org development is a very big portfolio. There's quite a lot to it. And then I've got my almost like a second business now, which I'm really passionate about, which is working into really helping women leaders. And that came about because my daughter started work. She's been at work for probably more than 10 years now. But back then, when she started work in a male-dominated environment, she was talking to me about the challenges she was having. And she was having the same issues that I had when I started work. And I thought, goodness, things haven't changed for women in the workplace in a generation. And, if nothing's changed in a generation, what is it going to take to actually fundamentally shift the way that people work so that it's more supportive for women, of an environment where women can flourish? And that started to play out in working with senior women, where I was finding they were, fighting their way up the career ladder, and they got to that sort of glass ceiling and they'd look through it and then say, I actually don't want that world. I don't want to be in an environment where I have to work crazy hours and never see my children. And the ones that do it often have regrets. They talk about, I don't see the kids. I had a client of mine who I remember burst into tears one day, and she said to me, my little boy doesn't love me anymore.
Oh.
And it was heartbreaking. I said, what makes you say that? And she told me that she usually worked quite late. She was working till 8, 9 o'clock at night. They were working on a big project. And she said, I made a really big effort to go home and tuck him into bed last night. And she said, I got into bed with a book with him and he pushed me and he said, not mummy, I want daddy. And she said, it just broke my heart. She said, what have I done? What have I done? And that's the challenge that we have as women in the workplace, is this, work-life balance is an impossibility. We don't even try and call it that anymore. It's called work-life integration, as if that makes it better. And it started me on a journey of what can we do? What can we do differently in the workplace and as women? And it led me down a path where I spent 2 years with a group of amazing women from around the world. There's 538 of them who contributed to a big piece around, what does women's leadership look like? What should it look like? What does it look like for women who own their own businesses, who don't have the pressure of trying to conform to that, corporate mold? And I had some beautiful conversations with wonderful, wonderful women about what it really looked like for them. And out of that, we grew a model. It was like a crowdsourced model, which has now been tested by over 10,000 women. So I've got this really interesting, really valuable database now that's really where my passion is kind of heading me. The org development consulting work is great. It's the bread and butter of my business. But my real passion project now is how do we actually use what I've collected to shift the conversations in organizations? How do we change how we do this? Because we're not getting it right. And organizations, big organizations, are hemorrhaging really good women who are leaving to go and work for a not-for-profit, or they're starting their own business somewhere where they can be more authentically them.
Mm.
So that's kind of my story, I guess, in a nutshell.
Wow. I love that. I didn't know
Mm,
that that's where we're going to go. I
mm,
absolutely love that. I mean,
yeah.
that's real mission work, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm so passionate about it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I write every day
Mm,
what I call notes to self. And it's a way that I get present with my humanity. I
mm,
fully express myself. Those notes to self, those types of notes to self are just for me. And then once I've expressed myself fully, then I start to follow that flow of consciousness, and
mm.
my intuition starts to speak to me, and I go places and I see things. And this week, based on a conversation I had with a client who I'd never said this to them before or anyone before, I said, there's a little bit of madness in you.
Mm,
There's a little bit of madness in you. And it was a compliment because this
mm,
person is totally doing what you're saying in a different environment,
mm,
and how do we create the new if there isn't a little bit of madness around
mm,
our ideas? And actually, I was speaking to somebody today who was saying, even if there isn't a little bit of fury,
mm.
you
Yeah.
know? So I'm loving what you're saying. When you did this big piece of research, was there something in that research that you discovered that you weren't expecting?
There was, and there's been some. When I first started it, I thought that I'd be talking to mainly senior women in leadership roles because that's where I was working and that was kind of my target market. And something that's come out of it, which has been so interesting, is when I started an accreditation program last year to start accrediting other coaches in it. And I thought, again, I'd be getting leadership and career coaches. But um, the types of women who are picking up the work and using it have been quite extraordinary. They're using it in ways that I hadn't thought of. So in the group at the moment, we've got a woman who's studying to be an art therapist. And we've got a woman who's a female sexuality coach. And we've got a naturopath. And we've got a woman who's an events planner. And we've got a carers coach. So there's a whole range of women who are coming into my circles now who are saying, I love that model. I want to start using it. But they're using it in very different ways that I hadn't anticipated. And I'm finding that was really interesting. And when I was doing the research, like I said, I thought I'd be attracting a lot of senior women, and I certainly did get those, but I got a lot of women who were on the other side of it. They're kind of like, I was in corporate, but I left and I started doing my own thing. And again, women doing incredible, interesting work. And so I got to talk to, phenomenal women all around the world. And that's the real joy of it, is the stories that came out. And like I said, it was almost like a crowdsourced model. It was like a lot of input from different people. Like I'd send emails with questionnaires and say, Phil, can you please fill this out? Or can you please answer this question? Or can you please complete this sentence? Or, I did interviews with women. And I think it was the surprising thing for me was how quickly it grew. And it was just through that beautiful generosity that women have, that collaborative nature, where I sort of put it out on LinkedIn to some people I knew and went, I'm thinking about women in leadership. Would anyone be interested in answering some questions and maybe doing an interview and doing some focus groups? Just grew and grew and grew. And now we've had 93 countries it is. We've got data from
Wow.
93 countries, and it just all spread through word of mouth. I didn't have to really do anything. I didn't advertise it. It was just people connecting with me, connecting with the work and then spreading it to friends and connections and peers. So I was just blown away by the just that beautiful generosity of spirit that people had, where they're
Mm.
like, I love what you're doing. I'd like to talk to you, but I've also got friends that would be interested in being involved.
Well, that's when you know something's resonant, right?
Mm.
When
Mm.
it just grows so effortlessly and with grace, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Yeah,
was so easy. It was one of those things where, um, the research part of it was hard, but the connections and the gathering of data was just really, really easy.
yeah. And why do you think, so you said, and I know what you're talking about, when you have an expectation of who you think something is for,
Mm.
and then it's actually not those people that are the ones that engage with it or sign up for it, and it's somebody, there's another group of people that you didn't actually expect. Why do
Mm.
you think these are the ones, the what did you say, there was a sex education
Yeah.
coach, what were the other?
Art therapy, carers, coaches, naturopath.
Yeah.
It's just been really interesting. And look, we have got career coaches and leadership coaches in it's a very small group. We've only just really started last year, and I think I've got about 18 people who've gone through the accreditation. But they've all been attracted to it. Like a couple of them are people who've been to some of the work that so back before COVID, I used to run face to face. It's called the Sovereign Women's Salon, and it went for a day, and it was basically just a mini retreat. And so the sexuality coach did that, the naturopath did that, back before COVID. And when I sort of popped back up again on social media and started talking about it, they contacted me and said, "How do I get involved in it? I loved it so much, I want in." And all of the women who've gone through the accreditation so far have been women that I've connected with on some sort of personal level and told them about my work, and they've gone, "That's amazing. I want to do that. I want to have it as part of my offering to people." So it's just been interesting like that, because they're people that I didn't deliberately target them and kind of go, "I really want these people." I just sort of put it out on social media and said, "Look, as most of you probably know, I've been doing this thing since 2016. I'm now opening it up for accreditation. If anyone's interested, let me know." And yeah, it's just been really interesting. We've also got women in there who are doing, change of life coaching, that sort of menopause for women, that perimenopause, menopause, empty nest type of coaching as well. So it's just been interesting to see that range of people who've looked at it and gone, "I can see this being valuable to the people that I serve."
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. One of a new premise arrived when I was delivering my best year masterclass about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And the premise was, normally when we are creating things, we're often creating things from a place of lack and need.
Mm.
And this time, what I saw was, like, the premise just arrived, and again through my notes to self, which was the desire for more can be created from the appreciation of what is already here.
Yes.
And that's what I'm hearing when you talk about,
Mm.
you put it out there, and it wasn't the career coaches that you didn't know that were the
Mm.
ones that then connected with you. It was the people who were already in your community.
Mm.
Actually
Yeah.
people who were already under your nose.
Yeah. That I hadn't thought of reaching out to,
Yeah.
because I was like, I suppose I didn't make the connection.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the sexuality coach is also a video presence coach. And I did a bit of work with her. She helped me with some video stuff. Oh, years ago now. That was where I met her. And yeah, I just sort of didn't think of that. And she went, "It's going to work so well with the work that I do, both in the sexuality side and also the video presencing." So it's just been such a beautiful surprise to just have women calling me up and going, "I'd like to be accredited. This is what I do." And we have a chat about how it integrates with their work, but there hasn't been anything so far where I've heard what they've got to say and gone, "Actually, that's not going to be a good fit."
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. And tell me more about the accreditation. Like, what do they get accredited in? What do they learn? What do they walk away with?
So it's a model, and it's a suite of assessment tools. So the idea behind doing any kind of assessment is that when you're coaching people, it gives you a kickstart in the coaching process, because you can pinpoint the areas of strength and the areas of challenge that the person needs to work on. So the model's called the Women's Leader Archetypes. And essentially I've got 8 archetypes in the model. There's 4 empowered archetypes and 4 shadow archetypes. And the shadow archetypes appear when people aren't at their best. So what the model does is it highlights for women where they are, what's working for them, what's not working for them. Just a little thing I need to say here is it's not based on Jungian archetypes, because I do know there's quite a bit of work around there around Jung's archetypes. It's based in social motives and neuroscience, so there's quite a lot of background to it. And what people get through the accreditation is they get access to use the model in their work and also to access our assessment tools.
Right.
So yeah, and it's a 4 to 6 week process to go through accreditation. There's quite a lot in it, but yeah, it's again, that was a bit of a labor of love for me putting it together. It was like, I just had so much fun doing it.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So in terms of, this podcast is called the intuitive pull. So in terms of the intuitive pull, what I'm hearing is that is this work was exactly that.
Totally. Mm.
now when you look back on it, like in hindsight, is it obvious or is it completely left of center? Like you never would have expected this to be your world.
Look, back before I started the work, it wasn't something that I didn't envisage it turning out where it was. I just went, I want to talk to women in leadership. I want to try and figure out what the issue is here. I want to try and figure out if there's a way to do things differently. And then it's almost like, and this was a really intuitive part of it, it almost felt like we were just surfacing ancient wisdom. It sort of felt like there's something there that women just knew about it ourselves. And so when I talk about the model, I say it was almost crowdsourced. It was like women talking about what women's leadership looked like for them. And then what I did was I took that and I applied the science to it, the neuroscience, went, what's the model here? Like, what are we creating? And one of the things I love about it is that when women go through the process, the assessment process, they're being benchmarked against other women. So when I'm accredited in over 25 different psychometric tools, because I'm a nerd, I'm a diagnostic nerd. And in working with leaders at all levels, I've got a lot of tools in my toolkit. But when you benchmark, you're benchmarking women against other leaders, and other leaders are predominantly men in business. And so the benchmarks are really skewed towards masculine style of leadership, whereas this is a tool designed by women for women and benchmarked against other women. So when you get compared and you get, say, you fall in the top 25th percentile, top 25 of women in the database, that's other women. So we're benchmarking you against women's leadership, which is the bit that I love about it. It really gives us something quite different for women.
And so I'm imagining that you're benchmarking ways of being related to feminine leadership, women's leadership. Can you tell me some of those ways of being that really light you up?
For me, or out of the model, do you mean?
Well, let's do both.
Let's do both.
Let's be great.
And look, it's I suppose the pinnacle of the model is the sovereign archetype, and that's, women at our best. And sovereign women are absolutely phenomenal to be around. They're the real powerhouses of the world. You get that beautiful sense of, being self-actualized, being confident, being self-assured. They know their way in the world, and they create their way in the world, and they have such joy in their lives. That's one of the things I love about it, is they do everything through this lens of what's going to make me happy, what's going to feel good. And they're not selfish, and it's not like they don't care about what people think, but it's not something that comes into their decision making. It's like, yes, that's going to upset some people, but that's not going to stop me from doing it, because if this is something that's really important to me and something the world needs, I'm going to go and do it anyway. And they hold power. There's quite a basis of how power works in my model. And for women who do this really well, it's socialized power, which is power for the good of the collective. I'm aware that I'm really powerful, and I hold that power and I wield it wisely. It's for the good of the community, for the good of the environment, for the good of the world, for the good of the collective, whatever that looks like. But there's really, if you meet a sovereign woman, there's something incredibly magnetic about them as well, because they've just got such an interesting lives and interesting stories to tell. You want to be in their presence. And I think and that was the fascinating thing about that one, was I just sent a sentence out to these 538 women on email, and I got quite a lot of replies back. I just said, a sovereign woman is, please finish the sentence. And this was the sort of thing that came back. People were talking about when I'm at my best. Well, I know women like that. My mother's like that, or I've got a colleague who's like that. And we just got this beautiful sense of what really women at their best really look like. And I just love that about, again, it was almost like we were just surfacing something we all knew. And when I went back to them and went, here's what you said, I've wordsmithed it a little bit, but here's what you said, everyone went, yep, that's it. That's what I'm like at my best. That's what I see in other people at their best.
Oh, there's two questions I want to ask you. Which one do I start with? Well, actually, it's one of them is not a question; it's a reflection, and then I'll ask you the question. So it's interesting. It's interesting that I'm talking to you, and we're talking about women. And last Friday, I was talking to Nick Mayer, and we were talking about men. And in the context of Nick, we were talking about his journey last year. He almost took his life. It set him on a path. He's now a mental health first aid trainer. And really the lesson for him was the freedom to be in his vulnerable self.
Yeah.
Right. And in that time, he didn't even feel like he had the freedom to be in his vulnerable self with his wife. He was suffering because he didn't want to be a burden on her.
Yeah.
right? So we're talking about, and we know, like I feel like you and I are talking the same language. I imagine that this is true for you as well, that, men are being invited also to go into the feminine version of their leadership, right? And to embrace one of the things called vulnerability.
Yeah.
And here on the other side of the spectrum, we're talking about women, and you're talking about women being in their sovereign power. And we're using the word power. I noticed that, right?
Yeah.
Power. So we're teaching men to be vulnerable and that being a powerful thing. And we're teaching women to embrace a version of power that makes them happy and ultimately makes everybody happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? Two sides of the coin.
Yes. And
Vulnerability and
we've become so polarized in leadership. It's like, this masculine version of leadership, which is seen as the right way to do it. And when women try and do it, it comes across as, you get labels, you get told you're too aggressive, you're too bossy, you're too loud, you're too opinionated, you're too whatever. Because when women try and do it, it just doesn't sit right. And the people on the receiving end of it, it doesn't sit right for. Whereas when women embrace this fact, you can be feminine and authentic and still be powerful. It's owning that power that we all have. We just tend to push it away because it feels like it's something, it's interesting because there's a lot of women who have got a natural inbuilt motivation towards power and influence, but they don't like to admit it because it's not seen as acceptable. It's not seen as the right thing to do. It's expected that you just sit back and you keep, you quiet that voice. And when women actually step into that and go, actually, I'm going to own this. It's actually okay to be motivated and engaged and energized by the idea of being influential. And then they step up and they really kind of flourish into that space. And, like you were saying, conversely, for men, they're sort of, again, taught that masculine leadership is the only way to do it. You've got to be aggressive and ballsy and, negotiate and all those things. And there are a lot of men that don't like that either. There are a lot of men who want to be more, like you said, more connected, more vulnerable, more human in a lot of ways. And it's not about there being a right or a wrong way or one being better than the other. It's just we need both. And at the moment, women are so underrepresented at leadership levels in government, in big organisations. We're just not heard. And the ones who do get there are forcing that masculine style to be accepted, and it burns them out really quickly, because it's not natural for them.
So the question that I was going to ask you when you were talking about, it felt like we were searching for ancient wisdom. Where that takes me is I can only assume for you to feel that you must have a relationship with spirituality yourself.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Look, I don't consider myself a religious person. I consider myself a spiritual person. And I really do feel that there's something out there. I don't really know what it is, but I definitely feel that, intuition is very strong in my life. And I often feel guided by something, probably bigger than me is the best way to describe it. I do tap into that sort of, like you said, like journaling or sitting with it or just asking for that wisdom to come. And I've certainly had some spiritual experiences in my time, which I can't explain, which, I find fascinating, that idea of there being something there that we can't explain through science. And you kind of look at it like, there's a really good example. I've got a close friend of mine who gave me many, many years ago, she gave me a pendant. It's like a little short chain and it's got a little, weight, I suppose, on the end of it. And she basically just showed me that she said, if you think about a question or you verbalize a question and hold the pendulum, it'll start to spin. And when it spins, one way it says saying yes, when it spins the other way, it's saying no. And I was a bit skeptical. I was like, how can that possibly be working? And so I used some really generic questions where I had no vested interest in the answer being yes or no. And it worked. And I was, quite astonished. I also discovered a few years ago now that I'm a water dowser. I can dowse for water. And I've tested that out. I do it with the, bent pieces of wire and you hold them straight, you walk towards water and they cross over when they cross water. And I got my husband to test me out by lining up buckets with lids, and there was water in some of them and some of them were empty. And I walked across the buckets. And as I went across the ones with water, the wires crossed over. And when I crossed the ones without water, they just stayed the same. And I can't explain that. But I used to use it. We lived on a farm, and I used to use it to find underground water pipes before we started digging in the
Wow.
garden and things like that. It's like,
Wow.
where does the pipe to the house go? And I just walk along and find it. It's like, there it is. So we don't dig
Wow.
there. And I also found that it worked to pick up underground metal as well. So where there was buried wire, like if a fence had fallen down and gotten covered over the years and there was wire underground. So I could, if before we ploughed a paddock we hadn't ever ploughed before, I could go and just sort of test it out and find, buried underground wire, which would have damaged the rotary blades on the plough.
Wow. That's so
So,
cool.
yeah. So quite unexpected things, and things that, like I said, I'm not religious, but there's definitely something there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Mm,
So that's pretty magical.
mm.
That's
The
pretty
water
magical.
thing is so cool. I've got no
Oh,
idea how it works, but it is so cool.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just like the wire takes on a life of its own, and you sort of feel it start to quiver, and then
yeah.
they just cross over. And then as soon as you walk away from the water, they straighten up again. They just do
I've never
this.
seen that. Never heard of that
It's quite
before.
extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never actually even heard of the expression water dowsing.
Mm. It's
Yeah.
finding underground water. We had why I thought about why I tested it out was we had a bore dug on our property, and the guy who came out to dig the bore used wire to do that. He said, I'm just going to wander around and figure out the best place to dig the bore. And he did exactly. I said, what are you doing? And he said, when you walk over a place where there's water, they'll cross. And he gave them to me to try out, and I did it. And I'm like, wow, that, I can't explain that. How did that work? And he dug, and sure enough, there was water there, and we had a bore. And that's when I started playing with it. But it was, yeah, just so interesting.
Very, very cool.
Mm,
So we're talking about your multidimensional nature here, right?
I suppose so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I would call it. Um, I'd like to ask you, have you had any multidimensional experiences with uh, the people that have been going through the accreditation, or even people in your consulting work? Have there been any magical, unexplainable situations that you've experienced?
Um, I, I don't know whether you'd call them unexplainable, but I found that when I do, say, for example, my Sovereign Women's Salon, and we spend time really working with women around, where are they at? What archetypes are they displaying in their life? Where are things going for them? And there's an activity I use called the mountaintop activity. And I get women to reflect on a time in their life when they've, just felt that life doesn't get any better than this. And then they reflect on that and they make some notes and they tell stories. And I find that almost inevitably everybody in the room cries, but it's not sad crying. It's just like that sort of joyous, that beautiful impact of people sharing, phenomenal. I like the story I share myself is I say, just to get you started, this is something for me that was one of those moments. And I talked about how we bred horses years ago, and we had a mare that was getting close to foaling. So we put her in her own separate paddock. And we got woken up really early in the morning by all the other horses starting to call out to each other. And so I, got out of bed and I said to my husband, I think, she might have foaled. Let's go out and check. And we rushed out, and we got there just in time to see the foal starting to stand up and, wobble about and go to mum and have a drink and things like that. And, it was my husband and my kids who were at home at the time. And we just all sat on the grass in the dew, and the sun came up, and we just watched this beautiful new life, just, you know, learning to walk, talking to her mother. She sort of came up to us. So her very first experience within half an hour of hitting the ground was basically being with people. So she grew up to be the most amazing horse. She just loved people so much because,
Oh,
she just kind of tottered over to us and just collapsed on in our laps basically, and we scratched her and rubbed her and tickled her belly
oh,
and everything. And she was so, but that sort of moment, and you get women talking about that, about times in their life, and it's always got, family or friends. There's always some sort of deep connection associated with that wonderful, wonderful memory of, when I've thought about it, life doesn't get any better than this.
mm,
And I think it's moments like those that define who we are.
mm.
And we don't talk about them anywhere near enough, do we?
No, we don't. I mean, I could even feel, the
Mm.
energy of what you were just talking about,
Mm.
that experience. Can you imagine if we spoke more about
Yeah,
those
more
types
about
of
that.
experiences? Yeah, beautiful. You do
Mm.
beautiful work. Absolutely
Thank you.
beautiful work.
It's lovely. I just love it so much. It's that, and really helping women discover who they are authentically, and the joy in that. Like, I've had women who've come for coaching because they want to get out. They're like, I need to get out of this job. It's awful. It's toxic. I'm on the executive. I can't stand the men I work with. And, I had a woman say to me after a little bit, she stopped talking about exiting and she started talking more about what she was doing at work. And I said to her, do you still want to get out? And she said, I've actually fallen back in love with my job all over again, because she'd learnt how to be authentically herself. She'd learned how to have a voice. She'd learned how to have confidence in who she was and speak up for what she believed was right and own her power. And she said the way that she was being treated completely shifted. She went from being, she said, there's an A team and a B team in this executive, and I'm definitely at the bottom of the B team, to being almost like the right hand of the CEO. You know, he was relying on her for advice, and for whenever something came up, he'd call her and brainstorm it with her. And she said she just fell back in love with her job. And that's because, you know, again, that finding that joy in things rather than focusing on the things that aren't great, because the men around her were still, you know, fairly toxic. I mean, they treated her differently because they'd finally got respect for her. But she was able to call out that toxic behavior a lot of the time. She was able to actually start coaching them in the moment. And it took time, but it did shift. But the big difference at the beginning was her attitude to it.
I love that. I mean, I feel like it's, when you talk about, you know, searching for ancient wisdom, it's like going back to our true nature. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I feel like your work is, helping people
And
go back
look,
to their true nature.
That's why I call them archetypes, because, you know, archetypes are a pattern. You know, we recognize it. If somebody says, you know, she's a real drama queen, everybody knows what that is. So an archetype is just a pattern. But I use the language deliberately because it really did feel like we'd, you know, just brought some ancient wisdom back to the surface and given it life again, I guess.
And what about you? I'm kind of going back to the question that I asked you about, you know, what are the ways of being that you most respect out of the archetypes? And you said to me, are you talking about, am I asking about you, or am I asking about the archetypes? And I said, well, let's have both. So we've talked about the sovereign archetype. What about you? Like, what do you feel is, like, what is the genius? What is the magic? What is the gold of your leadership?
I think for me, I've always had the ability to hold space for people quite powerfully and give them the opportunity to grow into whatever it is they need to grow into. And that's something that my clients have often said is something they've really appreciated, is the fact that, you know, when they come to a session, they feel they can be completely authentic and completely vulnerable and tell me all the things they've done wrong. You know, I'll have people come along and go, oh my God, I've just screwed something up so badly. And they've always felt like they're not being judged. And I think that's so incredibly important in coaching, is to give people just that genuine space of being totally there with them in the moment. And whatever comes up, you know, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, you know, we as coaches, we experience all kinds of emotions from people, and sometimes some pretty horrible stories about what's going on in their life, but it's just being there to just support and not judge and help them find a way out of it. And I think, you know, that's what people have said is my superpower. So I'm going to take that.
I like it. I like it. And, you know, I often talk about, you know, living a life of no regrets. So in your imagination, I know that there's a lot of life left to go, and who knows what life is going to bring. We don't know. But in your imagination, how do you know that in this point that, you know, when it comes time many years on, when you're, you know, leaving here, how do you know that you would have lived a life of no regrets? How do you feel like you fulfilled yourself, your mission?
That's actually a bit easier for me to answer, because I went through I've had cancer twice. So the first time was in 2010, and that was breast cancer. And, you know, when you get diagnosed with cancer and a doctor says to you, I'm so sorry you have cancer, the first thing that goes through your mind is, that's it, I'm going to die. And all the regrets come up, all of that. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that. Why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? And I had 6 months off work going through treatment and recovery. And I'm not going to go into it because it's a pretty horrible experience. But what came out of it for me was that for the first time in my life, I had two things happen. One was I was really, really aware of all the things I wished I'd done and hadn't gotten around to that by that point. And the second thing was this real feeling of getting a second chance. You know, particularly when I got towards the end of the treatment, and, you know, they eventually sign you off and say, okay, you've got to keep seeing doctors and staying on medication for the next 5 years, but essentially your chances of cancer returning are about 5 to 10%. And so for me, that was the moment where I reinvented my life. That was when I decided that I was going to quit my corporate job and start a business. That was when I decided, you know, my husband and I decided we were going to start traveling. We hadn't traveled because there were always good reasons to. It's too expensive. The kids are too little. The kids are too in university, all those reasons. And so I had my cancer in 2010, and in 2011, we took our first overseas trip together. And we've been doing that every year since, except for COVID. But it was really, it's like a second chance for me to kind of go, from now on, I really do have to embrace everything and live life as if it could end any minute, because it could. And look, my second cancer diagnosis in 2020 was rough, because my first thought was, this, it's so unfair. Like, why again? It was a different cancer. It's not breast cancer. And again, I've recovered from it. But it was that thing of, like, I can't believe I'm getting this again. This is not fair. But I moved on from that fairly quickly, because again, it was just that sort of reminder. I mean, I'd built up a huge kind of personal bank of resilience, I think, from the first time. And then the second time, once I got over myself and kind of went, okay, just got to deal with it. It's no point being upset about it being unfair. I've just got to work this through. Again, it was just a reminder that life's too short. You've really got to get out and do all the things you really want to do.
I didn't know that
like.
about you. I didn't know about that about you. And I've had Dr. Carol Haddad on the podcast a few times, an integrative oncologist. I've known for a long time now, and sometimes I coach some of her patients. So I've had the topic of cancer has been on this podcast several times. Question I want to ask you is, and there might not be an answer for it, so I'm respecting if there is no answer. In terms of your healing, right? So you are cancer-free.
Yeah.
What do you believe the cause of that was?
The cause of the cancer?
No, of the healing.
The cause of the healing. Look, it was right from the very beginning. Obviously, I took medical advice from my medical team.
Yep.
But I also integrated a lot of things that I knew would help. So, I'd always, one of the things about the first bout of cancer is the doctor said to me, a lot of people start to think about what they've done that could have caused it. Is this my fault somehow? Did I make bad choices? And he said, in your case, you didn't do anything. You kept a healthy weight, you exercised, you had your children young, you breastfed, you didn't stay on the pill for long, all the things. And he basically said, sometimes it just happens to people. But I drew on, I meditated, I exercised, I gave up sugar. I, was really careful with eating whole foods, eating organically. I did everything I could to support the healing process. So, going through the treatment with the doctors, but also doing everything that I could to support that. And one of the things that I think helps a lot is reducing stress, because it's enough stress already to be going through something like that. And, the treatment's hideous. It really is hideous. But reducing stress in other areas of your life, like I said, meditation, yoga, walking, being out in nature, spending time with my horses, doing all the things that made me happy. Again, it was getting back to, if it's going to be a bit rubbish, for a while, I need to really lean into those things that make me happy. And I think that really helped.
So, what I hear about that is that you didn't respond from a place of powerlessness.
No. And look, of course you do. It's ups and downs. Some days you wake up and it's, it's like, this is not fair. And some of the treatment is really, quite awful. And you do go through sort of phases. But a lot of the time it was just, I sort of felt like I just needed to, you just get on with it. It's like whatever's gets thrown at you, whatever comes out of the medical that day, you just deal with it and you just keep moving. And I think there was a lot of thankfulness in it too. I had a lot of gratitude, because I was going for radiation treatment every day during the week and then having weekends off. And I'd walk to the hospital. I used to park, about half an hour's walk from the hospital, and I'd walk there. And I challenged myself to find a different way to walk to the hospital every time. And I found 17 different ways to walk to the hospital from my parking spot, different alleyways and different buildings. But the thing that I was really grateful for is that when I walked into the ward to get treatment, there were people there being pushed in on trolleys who were obviously in palliative care. There were people who couldn't walk. They were in wheelchairs. There were people who had to lie on beds and things in the waiting room. And I was just profoundly grateful that I got to walk in and out under my own steam. And so I think that plays a big part too, that sort of keeping that, the gratitude, because things could have been so much worse.
Got one final question for you. I guess it's the big one, which is, how do you choose out of, all of your life history? What do you feel is the biggest gift you've had in your life?
I think my biggest gift is my family. Um, I I've married twice, so it's my second husband, and he's been the most amazing, wonderful man. He took on a single mum with two kids. He's been amazing. He's been an amazing husband, an amazing stepfather, and so on. And he's an absolutely amazing grandfather to our grandkids now. And I've, got two beautiful kids who've grown up to be adults, and I'm really, really proud of the people they've turned into. And I think that's it for me. That sort of things, that's the key thing. Everything else, the work is great. I love the work that I do. I'm so blessed to be able to do it. But at the end of the day, when you get a serious illness, the work, it's not important anymore. The thing that's important is the people you have around you.
Yeah. Thank you. True. And let's hope that, we don't all have to have illnesses in order to come to that level of appreciation for what really matters, hey?
Yeah. And look, somebody actually asked me once, about exactly that. Like, do you regret having had cancer? And I thought about it for a moment. I thought, actually, I don't, because if I never had it, I'd probably still be doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
I was in a corporate role. I was senior manager. I worked really hard. I didn't have enough time for the kids. It's that sort of thing, the typical story. And I don't, I honestly think if I hadn't had cancer, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for the experience. I mean, it was awful, but the rewards at the other side of it have been so big.
Yeah. Yeah. Often I say to some of the people that I support who have cancer is that one day, and I understand that when I say this to them at the beginning, they might tell me to F off.
Yeah.
Right. And I even frame it up that way. You might
Yeah.
actually want to say,
Yeah, feel
but I
free.
say one day
Yeah.
you may tell me that actually cancer was your friend
Yes.
and not your foe.
Yes. Yes, because it's horrible. But like I said, if I hadn't been through it, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I don't think I would have started a business. We may be traveling by now because the kids are all grown up and off our hands, but I don't think we would have been to the places we've been to and had the experiences we've had.
Yeah.
A lot of things now, when an opportunity presents itself, I do sort of look at it through that lens of, if I don't take this, will I have regrets? If I was facing cancer right now, would I still want to do this or not?
Yeah.
And just jump on it and do it, because, like I said, life's too short. Otherwise, you get to the end of your life and you look back on it, and nobody wants to look back on their life and go, gee, I wish I hadn't spent all that time at work. I wish I got to know my family a bit better,
Yeah.
And look, now I've got 3 grandsons, and 2 of them live quite close to us. They're twins and they're nearly 2. And I have Thursdays off work and I spend time with the twins. So
Oh, gorgeous.
it's great. I have them on Thursdays, and my husband and I have them on Sundays.
Oh,
And we just get
gorgeous.
to spend time with these beautiful little people. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't be doing that if I was working really hard and having to,
Yeah.
I'd hate to have to say to my daughter, I can't have the kids because I'm working too hard,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're living what you're preaching, right?
Hopefully. Work in progress.
As we all are. So in terms of, if anybody was listening and they wanted to know more about the Sovereign Archetypes, even becoming accredited or even engaging you as a consultant, I'm going to have all of that in the show notes. Yeah. Is there anything you want to say about any of that before we sign off?
Look, I've got 2 websites, and that's quite important. So my consulting website is Shaping Change, and then there's womensleaderarchetypes.com.au on a separate website. So sometimes people do go to the Shaping Change website looking for the archetypes and can't find them. They're mentioned, but it's kind of buried a bit. So It has got its own identity. That happened last year. I kind of went, it's big enough now that it needs its own home. Okay. So people are sort of a little bit confused sometimes. I have to make it really clear. There's actually 2 parts to me.
Okay, all right. I will have those websites in the show notes. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing you with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Ciao, ciao for now.